Hey friends, it's Dr. David here from the Manual Therapy Interest Group, and I'm going to cover with you today's Research Review Monday. This study was really cool, and it was just released. The authors finished it last year, May 2019. I think they presented this to the university that they work at, but it was published in a journal, I think, just recently in 2020. I couldn't get the article from the journal, but I found their copy that they presented to the university. So the title of this is Forces Used in Manual Therapy of the Shoulder as Measured with Novel Pliance Glove Utilizing Ultrasound Imaging. And just to tell you real quick what they did and how it's relevant to you as a practicing physical therapist doing manual therapy on shoulders, what they did is they had special gloves, and let me scroll over to the page so you can see a picture of it. Here we are. These special gloves where the therapist could do the shoulder mobilization, and the gloves register how many newtons of force is being generated from the therapist's hands. And then they use an ultrasound imaging machine on the shoulder joint to see how the glenohumeral joint was moving. They wanted to track how the humeral head was moving, and they use the whole grading, the joint grading scale, grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and then manipulation would be 5, to figure out how much force is needed. And what I thought was interesting about this study, so here's my 2 cents, right? Let me go up a bit more. They were citing evidence from past studies that had done similar research, and they found that an average of 400 newtons or 39.2 kilograms of force was necessary to achieve a cavitation. Now, cavitations don't happen in everybody, as we know. It just depends. And I don't know newtons, so I had to figure this out. So 400 newtons is equal to 89 pounds of force. How many of you are going to push 89 pounds of force through somebody's shoulder? That's pretty intense. I think that's going to rip something, very likely. So I don't know about that research. What this study found was they were in the range of 14 was the average, and then it went as high as 35 newtons. So just to put it in, give you guys a reference point, if 14 was the average, we're talking 3.14. Hey, that's pi, or close to it. Pounds of force. So it's not that much force with your hands. And then if you go up to 35 newtons, you're at 7, almost 8 pounds of force. So that's much more doable for most people, not 90 pounds. But what I wanted to highlight on here is your technique matters a lot. And that's not something that this study talked about, especially with the glenohumeral joint. And I talked about this in one of my manual therapy Thursdays, where making sure that you do distraction at the glenohumeral joint versus traction is a big deal. Now, this study looked at inferior glides of the shoulder. So if you got the ball and socket joint and you're going to do your mobilization, you're holding the humeral head. If you're pulling down along the length of the bone and you're doing traction, and then you try to mobilize inferiorly from there just isn't that much more force that much more space in the joint, and it's going to require a lot more force to effectively mobilize it. So I think that's why some of these studies are reporting 400 newtons of force or 90 pounds of force. But when you get better at your manual therapy skills and you get a really good feel for how the joint moves, and when you're taking up slack or putting it on slack rather than taking up slack, and you can begin to detect with your hands the mobility that a joint has, then you don't really need that much directional force. I can tell you, in a glenohumeral joint, the majority of my force, which it's a tiring mobilization for me, I have to distract and with my whole body. I'm doing kind of a partial squat just to maintain the distraction. The patient's kind of sliding over off the table just a bit. They're not off the table, but they're headed in that direction. You feel the stretch in the joint. You feel that distraction happen. And while maintaining that, then you have to do your inferior glide, posterior glide, anterior, superior, whatever directions you're going to go. And it's not that much force that you're going into posterior, inferior, superior. But what does take a lot of force is that distraction. Now, what these researchers found was that there was a correlation between the age of the individuals and how much force was needed. And they gave different reasons. I think that makes sense with, arthritis coming on as we age. But something to look at that I always pay attention to, I haven't seen it in research though, is genetics. Some people are just genetically flexible. The people that tend to do gymnastics and cheerleading and those types of sports, versus other people are more stiff. That's me. Those are probably the people that are going to be more inclined to lifting weights and doing those kinds of sports that require a lot of strength. The people that are genetically more inclined to put on muscle and lift weights, those kinds of things, they're going to tend to be stiffer. Plus, if they have more muscle on them, that's just more tissues to work against to do your mobilization, versus somebody who's thinner, somebody who's into yoga and Pilates and just is more slender and doesn't have a whole lot of meat on their body. That's their genetics, or maybe they just haven't built it up. They tend to move a lot easier. There's just less resistance from their soft tissues. So that's something to consider. I can tell you from personal experience, I use a lot more force on some big meaty football player or weightlifter, somebody who's got a lot of muscle in them, versus somebody who has been doing yoga for 20 years and they're slender and don't have much meat on them at all. I don't need that much more force. So I love this study. I love that they have these gloves that they set up. I think it's so cool. Where I'm just going to nitpick it a bit is that they need to explain more about how they did the technique exactly and what kind of training they have. I know for me as an experienced manual therapist, as a fellow, I've gone through all that training. I did not know how to properly mobilize a glenohumeral joint before I went through all my training. And the way that I do it now is completely different than the way I would have done it before any sort of fellowship advanced training. So that, I think, needs to be factored into these studies so that everybody can kind of get on the same page as far as how they're doing. We can standardize the technique, if you will. That's hard to do. That's a tall task. I know that. I'm not saying that these guys did a bad job by any means. I'm just saying that's, I think, where the research needs to head in the future. But I absolutely love this study. I'm super excited to see this, and I wanted to share this study with you guys. Anyways, I hope you guys have some questions or concerns or comments. I want to talk about this study. Comment below on this thread here. If you need to shoot me a direct message, you can do that as well. I want to hear your thoughts about how you mobilize the glenohumeral joint, how many pounds of force you think you're giving. Have you been giving too much force or too little force, maybe not doing the technique as you thought you might have? That's okay. And by the way, this is an open forum to be honest. I mess up all the time and do things wrong all the time and don't even know it until later. So I'll be the first to admit that I'm not perfect. So don't feel bad if you're like, I screwed that up. That was me. Anyways, I hope you have the best day, and thanks for watching today's Research Review Monday. Bye-bye.